There are nights you remember not because something big happened, but because you made a choice so small it barely registered. And that choice became the wall everything else hit. I have gone over that night so many times that the details have started to feel like a rehearsed story rather than a memory. But the facts stay the same no matter how many times I say them. My husband spent 6 hours searching the city for me while I was in a stranger's apartment with a man I had met 4 hours earlier. He called every friend he had. He drove to the hospital. He filed a welfare check with the police at 3 a.m. And I was asleep in someone else's bed with my phone turned off. That night did not break my marriage. My marriage was already breaking. But that night turned a private collapse into a public one. And I have had to live with that difference every day since. My name is Nora. I am 31 years old, and at the time this story begins, I was a social media content manager for a mid-size lifestyle brand called Vella, the kind of job where you spend your days building images of a life that looks effortless, and nobody asks whether your own life looks the same way. I was good at it. I was good at most things that required deciding what other people should see. Marcus and I had been together for 6 years and married for 3. He was a civil engineer, quiet, reliable, the kind of man who fixed the leaking tap before I noticed it was leaking. We lived in a 4th-floor apartment in the Riverview district, and on paper our life was steady and warm and complete. He used to leave notes in my coat pockets, not long notes, sometimes just a grocery reminder with a small drawing of whatever was on the list. A carrot, a wedge of cheese labelled the good kind. I kept everyone in a shoebox on my side of the closet. The most recent one was 14 months old, and I only counted the months because one morning I opened the shoebox for something else and found myself counting without meaning to. We still had a Sunday ritual. No phones, just coffee, and the south-facing window for as long as we wanted. We never scheduled it. It just kept happening. Or it used to. One Sunday, I came to the window and he was already there with his laptop open on the table beside him. He said he would close it in 10 minutes. He closed it in 40. I sat with my coffee and watched the street and said nothing. And he said nothing either. And we called that a peaceful morning. He asked me that evening if I wanted to plan something for the long weekend. I said, sure, maybe. Let's see. He said okay, and went back to his book. I watched the back of his head and had the specific quiet feeling that he had already assumed I would come, that the question was a formality, that I was a given in an equation he had already solved. I did not say this out loud. I transferred his most recent note from a coat pocket into my phone case, the yellow one he bought me after I lost my phone twice in 1 month, and carried it there without explanation. That was the beginning, though I would not have called it that then. The Anchor Bar was not a place I chose deliberately, at least not the first time. It was 3 blocks from my office, the lighting was good, and no one from Vella ever went there. I told my colleague Bianca I went there to decompress after long client calls, which was true until the 3rd visit, when Ryan was working the bar. Ryan was 29. He managed weekend shifts and did something with a music production project the rest of the time. He got my order wrong that first evening and laughed at himself in a specific, unguarded way, not performing humility, just genuinely unbothered by the mistake. And I talked to him for 4 minutes about nothing and thought about it that night at 11 o'clock and told myself it meant nothing. The second time I came in, he was there again. I stayed for an hour and a half. We talked about my job, about the difference between curating a life and living one, about what I had wanted to do at 22 before I got good at content strategy instead. Nobody had asked me that question in years. I took my phone off the bar and set it face down next to my glass so I would not see the screen light up, and the yellow case sat there between us like a small and slightly embarrassing fact about who I was at home. I left the case on. I told myself that meant something. I arrived home at 11. Marcus was awake in the living room with his book, and my dinner was covered on the stove. He had left it there without a note, which he never used to do, and the absence of a note was the kind of detail I stored somewhere I could retrieve later when I needed to feel justified. He asked where I had been, calmly, the way he asked most things, not accusatory, but specific. He mentioned the 4 hours between my 7 o'clock text and my arrival. He asked whether something at work had been hard lately, or whether there was something between them she wanted to talk about, something she had been keeping to herself. He said he had noticed the distance and he wanted to understand it, not solve it, just understand it. I told him he was reading too much into a long evening and that I was tired, and this was the wrong time for this conversation. He waited a beat, then said he was not going to pretend he had not noticed something shifting between them, and that if she needed something different from him, he would rather hear it directly than keep guessing. He mentioned the long weekend again. They could go somewhere, just the two of them, no agenda. And I said sure, that sounded nice. I went to the bathroom and stayed 11 minutes. When I came out, he had turned off the kitchen light, and the dinner was still on the stove, and I sat on the couch in the dark and told myself he had accepted my explanation. He had not, but I was not ready to consider that yet. I went back to the Anchor Bar on Friday and told Bianca she should come. She gave me a look over her glass when Ryan handed me my drink before I finished ordering, a look I chose to interpret as amusement rather than question. She asked on the walk to the subway whether it was really just the drinks. I said yes, and we both understood what I meant by yes. The charges appeared on the joint bank statement over the next 3 weeks, 3 separate dates, the bar's name clear on the card line, and Marcus never mentioned them. I told myself this meant he had not looked. What it meant was that he had looked and decided not to say anything yet, which was a different thing entirely, though I was not ready to consider that either. The weeks continued. I started telling myself a story about what the marriage had become, a version where I had been slowly disappearing inside it, where Marcus had stopped choosing me in any way that registered, where the distance was not something that had grown between two people, but something that had been done to me. The story held together because I was the one building it, and I had already decided what the ending was. One evening, Marcus came home and stood in the kitchen doorway and asked whether she had a minute. He mentioned the bar charges, not as an accusation, just the specific amounts and dates laid out plainly, the way he laid most things out, and asked her to tell him what was going on. I told him those were ordinary after-work drinks and that going through the bank statement like that felt like surveillance. He said quietly that they shared the account and both used it regularly, and that this conversation was not about the bar charges. He said something was wrong between them, and he was asking her to be honest before things became harder to repair. I told him the distance between them was real, and he needed to acknowledge his part in it before asking her to explain herself. He said he heard that, and he was willing to look at his part, and that Thursday, he had found a mediator who worked with couples. He would send the listing if she wanted to look. He said it was worth trying. I said yes, sure, send it over. He nodded and made 2 cups of tea and left mine on the counter near the door, the efficient location, not the old one, and went to read. The conversation was over without ever having been finished, and he had not raised his voice once, and I carried my tea to the window and stood in the dark and told myself he had accepted my explanation. He had, in fact, begun keeping track. The girls' night out at Lux was not my idea, which is something I told myself for a long time afterward. It was a celebration for Vera's promotion at work, and I was invited the way you are invited when you are good at making rooms feel warmer. Marcus knew I was going. I told him the venue and the group and said I would be back by midnight. He said to have a good time and meant it without reservation, and I remember standing in the bathroom getting ready and thinking briefly that his lack of worry was itself a small injury. He was not afraid I would not come home. He assumed I would. I brought a plain black phone case in my bag. I want to be precise about that. I had seen the yellow case in 3 photographs from recent evenings out and thought it was too conspicuous in photos. I brought the black case deliberately, placed it in the inner pocket of my bag alongside the note from the coat pocket that I still carried without understanding why, and told myself this was a practical decision and not a rehearsal for something. Lux was loud and bright in the specific way of venues where people come to be seen. Bianca was there, and Sarah, and two of Vera's friends from her previous company. Early in the evening, a group of strangers at the bar asked whether I was married, and I hesitated for a visible second before saying I was in something complicated. It was not a casual hesitation. Sarah was standing close enough to see the second it lasted, and something in her expression changed in a way I chose not to examine. Ryan arrived at Lux around 11. I had mentioned the venue to him earlier in the week, in the way you mention something when you want to be able to say later that you did not invite him. He appeared at the bar and I performed surprise in a way that was technically indistinguishable from the real thing, except that Sarah was watching me again and did not look convinced by the performance. For most of the night, Ryan was near me, his arm close to mine on the bar, the conversation tilted toward us, my laugh coming out with the specific brightness of someone performing being fully alive. Someone in the group photographed the dance floor. I was in the frame, Ryan's arm at my waist, my face turned toward him. The photo was posted in a public story and I was tagged, and I saw the notification on my screen and left it there without taking it down. Near the end of the evening, Sarah pulled me aside toward the hallway by the coat check. She asked me, low and direct, what I thought I was doing. I laughed and told her not to be the fun police. She said she was serious. I told her she sounded like a wife, meaning it as a loose joke. The people near enough to hear went quiet in the specific way that means something has been filed away. And Sarah's face went still. Not hurt exactly, but finished, like a decision had been made. In the Lux bathroom, I stood at the mirror for a long time. I opened Marcus's contact on my phone and held his name on the screen for almost a minute. Then I closed the app. I took the yellow case out of the inner pocket of my bag and set it on the counter beside the sink and put the black case on instead. But I kept the yellow one. I returned it to the inner pocket, next to the note, and told myself this was not a meaningful choice. Marcus called at 12:22. He called 34 times across the next 6 hours. He texted Bianca, Sarah, Vera's two friends, and two people from my work he had met at last year's company event. He drove to the hospital at 2:15 in the morning. At 2:58, he called the police non-emergency line and filed a welfare check, and the operator logged the time and the reference number, and he saved both in his phone. I came home through the building's underground parking garage at 3:17. The lights at the far end flickered and hummed. There was cedar and smoke on my jacket collar from Ryan's side of the bar. I sat down on the concrete floor with my back against the car and looked at 34 missed calls arranged in a column on the screen of the black case phone. This was not guilt yet. It was the specific sensation of facts arranging into a shape you are not prepared to hold. I went upstairs. The apartment door was unlocked. The apartment was empty. He was still out, still driving through the city looking for me. He came home at 4:40. He stood in the doorway and looked at me for a moment without speaking. Then he asked, very calmly, whether she was all right. I said yes. He nodded and went to the bathroom and I heard the water run. He did not ask where she had been. Not that night. In the morning, he set my coffee by the door. He asked if she wanted to talk. I said I would rather wait until they were both less tired. He said okay, picked up his keys, and left for work. The photo was still live in a public story, tagged, visible to everyone we both knew, and I had not taken it down. Bianca sent me a message that afternoon that said only, "Call me when you can." I did not call her. 9 days after Lux, Marcus told me everything he had done that night. He did it at the kitchen table, no raised voice, the items laid out in order, the calls, the hospital, the welfare check, the police reference number, the screenshot of the public story he had taken before the tag came down 6 hours after it went live. He held his phone across the table so I could see the screenshot and said nothing else while I looked at it. I had already built the scaffolding. I told him I had lost signal at the club, ended up at Bianca's because she lived closest, panicked about the hour and turned my phone off rather than explain the lateness, and that I knew I should have handled it differently. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said okay, set his phone face down on the table, and asked whether she wanted more coffee. The Sunday dinner at his parents' house was already scheduled. I suggested we skip it. He said we should go. I bought dessert from the bakery with the blue awning on 7th, the one Marcus liked, and arrived at the dinner warm and present and attentive to his mother and careful with his father. His older brother Owen was quiet for most of the meal, in the way people are quiet when they have been waiting and have chosen their moment carefully. 2 years earlier, I had made a comment at a different dinner that Owen's logistics work was a fancy word for driving things around. I had meant it as a broad, offhand joke. Owen had laughed along. He had not forgotten. When Marcus excused himself briefly from the table, Owen said, to nobody specifically but directed clearly, that he hoped she knew what she had. He did not elaborate, picked up his fork, and his mother changed the subject. I said of course I knew, in the right warm tone, and my hands went still on the table for a moment. On the drive home, Marcus was mostly quiet. I talked too much, about the food, the drive, a work situation I stretched longer than it needed to be. When we got home, he went to the bathroom and the shower ran. It ran for 22 minutes. When he came out, his face had a tiredness in it that I had not seen before. Not the tiredness of a long week, but something older and more settled. The look of someone who had made a decision while the water was running and was at peace with it. I saw this. I told myself he was performing sadness to make her feel guilty. I had become so practiced in performing emotion that when I encountered the real version, I identified it as theatre, because I had no other template for what his grief looked like when it finally surfaced. He asked the following morning whether she had thought about couples therapy. He said it calmly and held his phone toward me with an appointment listing visible. A mediator on Merchant Street, Thursday afternoon. He had already scheduled it before he asked. He was not responding to a suggestion I had made. He had been preparing for a conversation I had not started yet, and I looked at the listing on his screen and understood this precisely. I told him I thought it was a good idea and that I was glad he had found someone. Later that week, the colleague whose promotion Lux had celebrated had a husband who worked in the same firm as one of Marcus's project contacts. That contact mentioned the photo to Marcus as something he should probably know about, and Marcus said he already knew, and the conversation moved on. He told me about this exchange that same evening, briefly, in the same neutral tone he used for logistical updates. He asked whether she was hungry. That evening, I went to the home office for my charger, and the shelf above the desk was empty. The blue folder, his work documents, 3 years in the same spot, was gone. I told myself he had taken it for a site visit and chose not to look at the shelf again. The following morning, I came to the kitchen and found his laptop open on the table to the joint bank statements, organised by date. He closed it when I walked in and said good morning. He asked, after I sat down, whether she wanted to explain the anchor bar charges, and named the 3 specific dates and amounts. He said he was not asking as an accusation. He said he had a right to understand what was happening in his own marriage, and that nothing about the past several weeks had felt right, and he was asking her to be honest while there was still something to repair. I told him the bar charges were ordinary, after-work drinks, and that reviewing the bank statement the way he was doing felt like treating me like a suspect. He said he was not reviewing it to build a case. He said he used the account regularly and the charges were visible to both of them. Then he said something that stayed with me longer than I expected, that he was asking because he was still here and still willing, and that would not be true indefinitely. He said Thursday's appointment was still on, and he hoped she would come. I said I would be there. He nodded, closed the laptop, and carried it to the bedroom. That night, I woke at 3 in the morning and reached for my phone on the nightstand. The yellow case was back on it. I had put it there myself the morning after Lux, coming upstairs to the empty apartment, switching cases back without examining the choice. I held the phone in the dark and understood slowly that putting it back had meant something, and that I was not ready to name what. The mediation appointment was on Thursday afternoon in an office on the third floor of a building on Merchant Street. The mediator was calm and precise, with a notepad open from the moment we sat down. Marcus had described the appointment as mediation rather than therapy, and I understood the difference only when I was already in the chair. She asked each of them, in turn, to describe what they believed the current state of the marriage was. Marcus spoke first. He was specific and measured and fair. He described the distance of the past year, named his own patterns, acknowledged where he had been absent in ways that mattered. He did not attack me. He spoke like someone who had prepared not to win an argument but to be accurate in one. Then she turned to me. I had not planned to say what I said, but sitting in that chair, in a formal room with a professional present and a notepad recording everything, I understood what the moment could give me. If I said it first, I was the author. If I said it first, no other version could define me. So I told her that I did not think I had been in love with Marcus for a long time. I said I believed I had stayed because leaving was harder than continuing. I said I thought we would both be happier apart. I watched his face while I said it. It did not collapse. It settled. Something held tense for a long time finally releasing. And the expression that replaced the tension was not devastation, but a quiet, specific clarity. He looked like a man who had been waiting for an accurate version of something and had just received it. The mediator wrote it down. After the session, we walked to the parking structure below the building. I had my keys in my hand. He stopped near my car and told me, without preamble, that he had kept the call log from the Lux night, the 34 calls, the hospital timestamp, the welfare check entry at 2:58, and that he had kept it not as a weapon, but because for a long time he had thought he might need to show it to someone and could not bring himself to delete it. Then he asked one question. He asked whether, if the morning had not come, if she had woken up in that apartment with no consequence, no one waiting, she would have come home at all. I told him the question was unfair. I told him he was constructing a version of me that suited the story he needed. I said the marriage had been failing for 2 years and that instead of examining that honestly, he was reducing everything to one night and that he had never truly seen her. Not lately, not for a long time. And that was the problem no call log could address. He was quiet. Then he said he had been watching her disappear for 8 months and had kept believing she would find her way back. He said he saw her. He said he was sorry he had not known how to say it in a way she could hear. Then, in a tone that was not a threat because it did not need to be, he said he would handle the rest properly. He walked to his car and did not look back. I sat in my car with the engine off for a long time. I had said, "You never really saw me." He had said, "I have been watching you for 8 months." These two sentences did not fit in the same story, and my version of events had been built entirely on the certainty that the first one was true. He had quietly removed the foundation from underneath me. 2 days before the mediation appointment, I had gone to the Anchor Bar on a weekday afternoon when Ryan was not working. I went not to see him, but to confirm that the idea of him still existed, that something was still waiting for me on the other side of all this. The bartender on the afternoon shift mentioned, without being asked, that Ryan had given his number to someone who came in on Saturday. Ryan had not been in contact with me in 6 days. The audience I had built my certainty around had already moved on before the consequences arrived. In the days after the mediation, Marcus became very organized. He ate at regular times, answered work calls completely, kept the apartment clean without discussion. He stopped leaving my coffee by the door. I could still hear the machine from the bedroom each morning. But he was no longer including me in the small daily logistics of his life. He was not punishing me. He had simply reorganized around the accurate version of the situation. I became louder in proportion to his quiet. I talked too much when I came home. I asked questions he answered briefly and completely. I mentioned scheduling a follow-up appointment. He said he would think about it and did not schedule one. One evening, I noticed the shoebox had been moved from the floor of the closet to the shelf above, and below the shelf sat a neatly packed bag. folded clothes, a toiletry kit, a paperback with a bookmark in it. He did not explain the bag. I did not ask about it. I stood in the doorway for a moment and then went to make tea and told myself he was being dramatic. He was packed, and he had been packed for days, and neither of us said so. 3 weeks after the mediation, I was returning from a morning errand, coffee from the corner cart and a pharmacy bag tucked under my arm, when a man in the building lobby confirmed my name and handed me an envelope. Inside was a formal divorce petition, signed by Marcus and filed with the civil court 3 days prior. Attached was a motion for temporary orders. Exclusive occupancy of the apartment pending the first hearing, granted to Marcus. Joint account management separated until a financial affidavit was complete. A preliminary asset inventory, organised by acquisition date. The first hearing was listed 22 days from the petition date. I stood near the mailbox alcove with my coffee going cold. A neighbour held the elevator behind me. I did not move. The petition referenced specific documentation. The mediator's sworn statement from the Merchant Street session, including my declaration about the state of the marriage. The welfare check police report time-stamped at 2:58. The hospital arrival log from 2:15 in the morning. 34 calls in a logged column. Bank statement records across 3 months. And a written witness account from Sarah, describing the events of the Lux evening, including the specific remark about what a wife sounds like. Nothing in the document had been invented. Every piece of it I had built myself, across months of choices I had named as something else. I called my sister Kay that afternoon and laid out my version. I said Marcus had gone straight to paperwork without genuinely trying. Kay let me finish. Then she said, quietly, that I was describing a man who had spent months trying, and that I was the one who had stated, in a formal session with a witness present, that I had never been in love with him. She asked whether that was what I had meant. I said it was frustration in the moment. She said that in a mediation room, frustration and intent are recorded as the same thing. She said she loved me, and that she had been watching their mother's pattern their whole lives, and that she was afraid of what she was watching now. I hung up before she finished the sentence. Closure snapshot. The temporary order moved me out of the apartment within the week. I rented a single room in a shared flat on the east side of the city, 1 window facing a brick wall, 2 shelves, a dresser that belonged to the flat and not to me. The joint account sat under court management until the affidavit was processed. My salary covered the room and not much else, and the margin between those 2 things was something I thought about every morning. Sarah had submitted a written account of the Lux evening through the company's HR process at a colleague's suggestion. It did not end my employment, but it produced a formal performance note in my file and a reassignment to a lower visibility team. The mid-year campaign lead role I had been informally told was coming went to someone who started the same year I did. I read the announcement email twice and then closed my laptop and did not reopen it until the afternoon. Ryan did not respond to 3 messages I sent over 2 weeks. The first 2 showed as read. The third never did. Bianca stopped calling after the second week. Sarah did not block me or say anything publicly. She simply did not return calls, which was a quieter and more complete kind of absence than anything said out loud could have been. I returned to the apartment once to collect boxes while Marcus was present. He had not changed anything, but the apartment had a cleanness that meant it was no longer waiting for me. On the kitchen counter next to the coffee machine was the yellow phone case. I had left it there the morning I came upstairs and found the apartment empty and switched it back without thinking too much about why. He had not moved it. I picked up my boxes and walked to the door and did not take it. She did not lose the marriage the night she did not come home. She lost it the morning she decided he had already let her go.